On February 28th, a Korean was elected chairperson of the evaluation body for the UNESCO Convention for the first time. The newly elected chairperson is Bak Sang-mee. Professor Bak Sang-mee has been a leading figure in inscribing various intangible cultural heritages in Korea, such as KIMJANG and Jeju's HAENYEO on the UNESCO list. Last November, she had a profoundly meaningful moment as she contributed to having SSIREUM jointly inscribed on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage list with her persistent efforts.
So I'm sure that there should be abundant possibility of jointly nominating the same heritage.
Back in 2014, she received both domestic and foreign spotlight as a Korean culture guide for then-U.S. President Barack Obama.
I was very honored to accompany then President Mr. Obama.
On today's Heart to Heart, we'll have Professor Bak Sang-mee, who's worked on promoting Korean culture to the world and further share stories on Korean cultural heritages and their values. Thank you for joining us today right here on Heart to Heart. I'm very excited to share lots of stories with you. I've got tons of questions for you, but I would like to begin by congratulating you because you have become the first Korean chairperson of the evaluation body of UNESCO for Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity. And I'm sure you've been showered with congratulatory messages, but since you are here with us today, I'd like to ask you, how does it feel?
First of all, I'd like to thank for your kind words. Since the election result was out on the 28th of February this year, many friends and many colleagues have congratulated me on the election result. Most of all, I really thank my colleagues in the body of evaluation body because they have bestowed me the trust that I should fulfill. And I'm also happy to be congratulated by people with whom I've been working for the last 20, 30 years in the field.
Now, you were unanimously elected as chairperson of the evaluation body. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think is or was the main reason behind that decision?
I have been in the field for about 20 years, and if I include the period before that, when I prepared for working in this field as a student and a little later on as a sort of a more conventional type academic. So it's been more than 30 years. So this is one of the kinds of work we would like to do at some point in our career. So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. Luckily, I have found this line of work which I really love and which also is, I think, quite meaningful.
Yes, we will definitely be getting into how passionate you are about the work that you do and how passionate you have been while you were involved in doing everything you have and achieved. But first of all, I'd also like to ask you about what UNESCO is doing to actually safeguard intangible cultural heritage.
Actually, among the many things that UNESCO is concerned, cultural heritage is the best known field to the general public. So people recognize the name UNESCO when they think of UNESCO heritages. For intangible cultural heritage, which is the main area I'm working in, UNESCO has a convention. It's called 2003 Convention for Safeguarding Intangible Cultural Heritage. And according to that convention, they have many programs and systems, and UNESCO Heritage List is a part of that system. So UNESCO has been doing a lot of work to safeguard the humanities' intangible cultural heritage, and we have this list system. And some people criticize for having such a list system because they sort of create some kind of competition among the state parties, and sometimes it seems like they put a hierarchy among cultures, which is right against to the principle of cultural relativism. But even with that, listing system is quite effective to raise visibility of heritage.
Yes,
so that's why we do that.
Yes, yes, I totally understand. Now, what are your main duties as chairperson of the evaluation body?
To tell you what I do as the chairperson,
Yes.
I think I should start with the evaluation body itself. It consists of 12 members, and they classify the state parties to the convention, which is at the moment 180 countries. They divide them into 6 groups, electoral groups, and each group has 2 members of evaluation body.
Oh,
And
okay.
Korea belongs to Group 4, which is Asia Pacific, that has about 50 countries. So we gather and we basically evaluate the nomination files that the state submitted for their heritage inscribed to be on the UNESCO list. So this year, for example, we evaluate 52 files and we make a recommendation to the Intergovernmental Committee whether a particular heritage is suitable or good enough, worthy enough to be on the UNESCO list.
Okay, and is there also a deadline, a date?
Deadline, date, and everything very exact. So these nomination files that we will be evaluating this year were submitted last year's March.
I see.
And then after some fact checking and
Yes.
everything, it was turned over to us.
So it's a long process, a very long process.
About 2 years, but usually state parties spend another 3-4 years to prepare
Right.
those nomination files.
Now, last November, since we're talking about what goes on the list, of course, some don't make it on the list, but some do. Let's talk about last November, SSIREUM, which is traditional Korean wrestling, officially became Korea's first jointly inscribed UNESCO World Heritage item. How was this decision reached? And I did mention first joint.
It was for all Koreans, I
Yes.
think. It was a very moving moment. And that joint inscription was done in a somewhat unconventional way. Usually when the state parties would like to have joint nomination, they have to prepare the nomination file together. And then submit it jointly.
Yes.
But these 2 files, North Korean SSIREUM and South Korean SSIREUM, were submitted separately. But UNESCO made this as a real special case. And this is, there's no better example of peace through culture, which is the motto of UNESCO.
Yes.
So they made a special decision to combine 2 successful nominations into one, and they proclaimed it as a joint nomination.
So this joint inscription of North and South Korea, what does this signify?
Joint nomination and joint inscription following is very significant in this whole system because UNESCO considers that the process of preparing for the nomination itself is very valuable because we make interaction with other cultures. So although this time North and South Korea prepared the nomination files separately, this was a special case, but in the years coming, we will try to follow the path, the official path of preparing the file together. And that will be very valuable part of North-South cultural exchange.
Yes. So you did mention, of course, so North Korea and South Korea separately, applied to, of course, add SSIREUM to the list. What were some of the differences? Do you happen to know?
Basically, it's the same heritage, but because North and South have been divided for over half a century, some changes happened. And in North Korea, we could see that SSIREUM is more of a sport rather than part of festival or community affairs. In South Korea, we do have pro sports, and we also have children's SSIREUM, and it's very diversified. But I think I could see a lot of similarities rather than differences.
Definitely. Well, of course, it is a Korean cultural heritage. Are there any other cultural heritages or items that the two Koreas may, in the future, I guess, apply for together, jointly?
Well, there is no question about cultural similarity and historical relationship. So I'm sure that there should be abundant possibility of jointly nominating the same heritage. We are aware that North Koreans have their own national inventory of intangible cultural heritage, and we know which heritages they have on the list. So we need to discuss which ones should be submitted sooner than later. So I think the kind of decision should be made through dialogue with North.
Yes, I look forward to it. Curious already. Now, with the addition of SSIREUM, Korea now has, correct me if I'm wrong, 20?
20 altogether on the UNESCO list.
On the list. And you're behind the campaigning of a number of them. Yes, we'll get to that. But could you tell us what they are, the 20 that are actually on the list at the moment?
Actually, the number 20 is word number 3.
Is that right? Wow.
We have quite a few intangible cultural heritage on UNESCO list.
Yes.
And we've been very active in the field. The first one was the royal ancestral worship ceremony and the music, Jeongmyo music. And the second one was pansori. I cannot go on for all the 20
But do you remember all
heritages.
20? Of course.
Of course I do. But that have been inscribed most recently have been very special to me because I have been more active in preparing the nomination file.
So as I've mentioned, you've worked tirelessly to get a number of these items, cultural heritage items on the list. Now, I'm sure there are many steps and stages, a very long process and a very complicated process you have to go through to add an item onto the list. I'd like to ask about perhaps the most difficult stage. What would be the most difficult stage when it comes to actually trying to add something onto the list, UNESCO list of intangible
I think it really
heritage?
depends on the circumstances in each country. For Korea, for instance, where people have a really high degree of interest on UNESCO list. Korea is one of the countries where UNESCO is very well known, especially because right after Korean War, Koreans benefited from what UNESCO did, like for their education program. And actually, my parents' generation has a memory of receiving textbooks with the aid of UNESCO. So Korean people are well aware of what UNESCO does. So in the same line, I think Koreans are really eager to put the cultural heritage they are interested in on the UNESCO list. So I think in the case of Korea, the most difficult part is for the heritage they are interested in to be chosen for submitting to UNESCO.
Yes.
The decision is made by the Cultural Heritage Administration with consultation with Cultural Heritage Committee, on which I'm one of the members. So that part it seems to be the most difficult one. But afterwards, it's just work. We can put together the nomination file, we can do research. That part it can be done. But there are lots of potential UNESCO heritages in Korea. I think it's a good thing.
Yes. Is there perhaps, if you could just pick one, which item, which intangible cultural heritage or asset would be the most memorable to you, and also why?
Well, it would be hard to choose one, but if I have to pick one, it would be KIMJANG, which actually I coined, making and sharing kimchi.
I see.
That's most dear to my heart because I think among the 20 also. I was most active in preparing the nomination file for KIMJANG, and the nomination file itself became very anthropological.
Yes.
So we were not just talking about making kimchi, we were talking about Korean society and culture with KIMJANG as sort of an item to look into. So that nomination file I really enjoyed preparing.
Yes.
Submitted by the Republic of Korea. Of culture of Jeju, HAENYEO, women divers.
Could you also tell us about, I understand there are several categories. So could you tell us about the categories, how the categories are divided, and how you actually put together an application, how the application was put together, particularly for KIMJANG?
Actually, the evaluation body has very clear criteria for evaluating each nomination file, unless there will be problems.
Yes.
So the criteria used is, first of all, it should be intangible cultural heritage as defined in the convention, UNESCO Convention, which includes performing arts, handicrafts, or knowledge on nature, social practices, etc. So it should fit the definition. But more importantly, it should have been transmitted through generations. So it's not, we are not talking about created culture.
For how many generations at least?
It doesn't specify for how many. It could be just 3 generations. It could be 100 generations. But it should be at the core of the community identity. So they have to regard it as important and representative of their cultural identity. So these are the criteria, but the third criterion is it should meet the global standards on the principles of UN and other related organizations, such as abiding by basic human rights, gender equality, or sustainable development. So all this put together, So when we prepare the nomination file, we have to incorporate these ideas and into writing the nomination file to show that this heritage satisfies all these criteria.
Now, in 2014, this was a year after the KIMJANG culture officially made the list, made the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage list. And then U.S. President Barack Obama, this was when he visited Korea. And at the time, you guided him through Gyeongbokgung Palace, the royal palace, and even introduced the Korean culture to him. Now, that must have been a huge experience for you. A very important or memorable, of course, incident.
Yes,
So please tell us about that.
Certainly, it was a very special experience.
Yes.
And it became more special and a bit more stressful, I must say, because of what happened around that time.
Yes.
I was very honored to accompany then President Mr. Obama through Gyeongbokgung Palace and to talk about Korean culture and history. But about 9-10 days before Mr. Obama's visit, there was a tragic incident of Sewol Ferry. We couldn't cancel the event because Mr. Obama's visit was something determined, but we canceled all the other cultural events that should have happened in the palace, everything. So my portion became a lot bigger than I bargained for. And it was decided at that time that this would be a private tour, so no one will be recording the conversation between Mr. Obama and myself.
Is that right?
So after like 5-10 minutes, I felt like I was walking with my fellow professor.
I see.
Because he's a very intelligent person, and he has curiosity on culture and history.
Yes.
So it turned out to be a very nice experience.
I'm sure. And it wasn't recorded. So I'm sure you had a very interesting conversation with him. And he also had this great opportunity to learn more about Korea and Korean culture as well as our history. So as a cultural anthropologist, you not only work to register Korea's cultural heritage, cultural assets onto the UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage list, but I understand that you have also helped or are supporting other countries do so in adding their, or of course, working to add their cultural heritage or assets onto UNESCO's list as well. So could you tell us a bit about that, which countries you have worked with or supported, and which items they happen to be?
I think it's high time for Korea to do such things, because we have been inscribing many of our intangible heritage on UNESCO's list.
Yes.
It's time for us to help out others who may not have the financial or technical resources to prepare for the nomination file. There are quite a few. One time to Vietnam, another time to Cambodia by UNESCO, to help out. In one case, they helped us to make legal codes for safeguarding heritage. So there I worked as a consultant, working with the local scholars and government officials. And I also worked in Fiji, and I worked with the local scholars and government officials to come up with a safeguarding plan for the ICH, Intangible Cultural Heritage in Fiji.
I see. So what would you say are the advantages of inscribing an item on UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage list?
Well, there are many. Actually, people talk about the positive aspect of inscription
And the
and not
negative?
so positive aspect of inscription. But I think the most important positive outcome of inscription is the visibility. Visibility of the heritage is enhanced through UNESCO inscription, because wherever we go, when we hear that there is UNESCO heritage, we make efforts to visit
Yes, we do.
and
yes.
actually see or experience the UNESCO heritage. So it enhances the visibility of the heritage itself. It also raises the awareness of the people
Yes.
on the value and importance of heritage as the common asset of the humanity. And ideally and hopefully, we think people will think twice about the value of the heritage.
And we are finally down to our final question. I'd like to ask about your future goals, your aspirations, before we say goodbye.
Well, at this point, I think I'll try very hard to be a really good chair of the evaluation body. I'll try to be as balanced as possible and bring up the desirable direction for the future safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. So that in the immediate future, that will be something that I'll be focusing on. And my tenure as the member of evaluation body is 4 years, so I have 2 more years as a member of the evaluation body. But in a longer term, I would really like to help out my students and others who would like to work in this field. So I, of course, share my experience, and I also would like to encourage them start from a very basic and simple work and doing more and more complicated work. But I would like to assure many younger people that it's a worthwhile effort to make for their career.
I'd like to thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I think it was an opportunity for us to find out or think about, cultural heritages, intangible cultural heritages, cultures of each and every country. Not only is our culture and our cultural assets important, so are they for other countries as well. I think they're all very, very important and they need to be promoted and shared with the entire world. Thank you so much for joining me once again and best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you for having me.
감사합니다.